Hey, thank you so much, Eric, and thank you all for sharing the valuable currency of your time and attention with me this morning. Really excited to be invited and honored to be able to share on this topic of microcredentials and connecting with SLOs. And I do want to kind of just as a housekeeping item, sort of clarify that I am a little bit weird. And so I do promise this has everything to do with microcredentials and SLOs. And I'm really inspired. There was a white paper last year out of the Aspen Institute by someone named Haley Glover that said that one of the biggest implementation problems that we're facing in the space right now is that so-called experts might be over-indexing on explanations. And I took that to mean making stuff to be more complicated than it actually is, and making stuff that should make sense not make sense. And so in my communications and storytelling around this, I've really been trying to think about, what is our why? What is really important, and how do we avoid jargon and acronyms and buzzwords and really, focus on the meaningfulness of why, people like me who've dedicated the better part of the last 12 years of my life to this stuff is because, we think it's going to change the world. And so I'm kind of going to lead into this in a way that, in my mind, 100% connects to SLOs and micro-credentials, and hopefully it works for you the way that I go about doing it. And I'm going to real quick share my screen to get some slides up. And I am doing it through just the uh, device of connections. And that for all the technology and software and shiny things, that this is really about humans at the end of the day. And can somebody just give a thumbs up that I shared the right screen and you're seeing slides and not speaker slides or something else? Yeah, Eric's nodding. Perfect. So, when we just think about how we connect in general, especially, is professionals, and in education, how do we connect? If maybe just in the chat or using your emoji reactions, give a heart reaction if you've ever had a second date in your life. Use the heart emoji reaction if you've ever had a second date. Um, Maybe I'm not seeing people because I'm not seeing a lot of hearts there. Okay, we got a couple hearts there. Okay, good. If you have ever been invited to a party, use the celebration emoji reaction. If you've ever been invited to a party, I'm seeing Ruth, Aaron, Suzanne. Yeah, so I guess that the point of that being is you're seeing how we connect with one another over, shared experiences, shared interests, shared competencies, right? We share over, collecting the same things, listening to similar music, liking or recommending similar books, food, religions, work experiences, sports, fashion, you name it, right? We connect in this world, and that has to do with a lot of our relationships, right? And I think that comes into play in just life with that axiom that we've all heard, that it's not what you know, it is who you know. And when we think about who we know, a lot of it is through, those sort of connections, right? That, who you know is really dependent on that. In some cases, that might be, what schools you went to. It might be different affiliations you have. In a lot of cases, it might be kind of zip code dependent. And that is a reality of our world. And, I think that part of what is so exciting and special about, what we're talking about today is the potential to reframe how we make those connections and how we operationalize and use those connections. But first, let's not quite, I want to avoid that risk of over indexing and getting complicated. And so just keeping it simple, just going back to thinking to yourself as a fourth grader. Like, how did you connect with people, right? Like, I couldn't find the beat as a fourth grader. Like, I was sitting there in music class and I saw people clapping and I was late because I didn't hear the beat. I had to look to other kids who could hear the beat, right? But did you tell jokes? Were you the one who, I guess this is showing my age a little bit, but if your parents were like, hey, we need you to record, you know, something on the VCR this weekend. Could you memorize sports stats? Were you the one who was able to fly in your own dreams, right? That there's, it wasn't necessarily the things that we think of that connected you. And I asked that, and hopefully everybody thought of some things, and maybe some people are being vulnerable and sharing in the chat what they, what connected them to others as fourth graders. But I had an opportunity to consult several years ago on a really interesting opportunity at an elementary school where they said, we want to rethink fourth grade rosters. And the truth of how fourth grade rosters at this school, and I'm guessing most schools, were determined is at the end of the year in springtime and April, May time, third grade teachers got together and made rosters for fourth graders. And the way they did that was they started out by just sort of taking all the students and just kind of doing a random juggle based off of there's going to be four fourth grade classrooms, divide the whole group by four. Let's move those numbers of students, into each of the fourth grade teachers' rosters. And then from there, they would say, oh no, like you've got too many runners in that class. We need to move some of these and rebalance. Or okay, we've got some screamers in that class. You're going to be overbalanced on that. Or oh, we've got you're going to have too many tattletales. And so they would kind of take this deficit focus of making sure they're not overbalancing certain classroom rosters on these negative behaviors, none of which are the things that any of us would like go back and think about if we were going to reflect on who was I in fourth grade, right? We might. And so the opportunity we had was to think, what if we instead started on positive traits? What if we needed to make sure that we have enough organizers? We need the kids who are really into making sure that we do cleanup right. We need to make sure, like, that if we do not have enough hand holders in your class, we're going to struggle with community. Do we have enough risk takers to make sure that there's going to be, fourth graders who are showing their classmates that it's safe to do the next thing, right? And it was this really great activity that we did, and they were still able to have these amazing fourth grade rosters, and they were able to construct them in what I think were some really special ways that also kind of for me gave me the opportunity to reflect on this notion that these connections that are so determinative, not just in our fourth grade lives, but for the rest of our, learning and working lives, is that these connections, a lot of times aren't made by us, but they are made for us. And that there's consequences to that. And so, that it just got me thinking not just of the opportunity of what we do here, but the responsibility, I think, that we have once we become aware of this and not just the positive things we can do, but also the potential consequences that could come of things that, we get wrong in doing this. Also, if you want to parlor game this, I made this slide deck right when Adobe's AI image generation tool came out. And I don't know if you've been guessing as we go which images are real photographs versus not, but that could be a fun little power game to play as we go. I'll give you a hint that there's a reason why I brought that up on this slide. I'll be speaking of being vulnerable. This my mom dug up my preschool kindergarten readiness assessment, and you can see there that you were supposed to color, and there's instructions on the bottom there to color his hat orange, color his shoes purple. There's some shape designations that are supposed to be different colors. And on my assessment, it said, quote, Noah talked through the entire explanation of each testing segment and was unable to work each task because he was clueless as to the point. And so, that was the assessment, right? That is, the recognition, right, that happened. And that is the narrative that might have come out of, that as far as my readiness, to enter kindergarten, right? And so, what I want to encourage us though through this lens, if you will, is to rethink the stories, rethink the narratives that might, be able to be surfaced if we are, open to the opportunity to do so. And, spoiler, I think that SLOs is one of the great devices to help us do that intentionally and meaningfully, right? Like, what if, we have SLOs that help us realize, wait, maybe Noah's not scatterbrained. Maybe he's demonstrating can-dos for creativity. Is he distracted or is he pattern aware? Is he procrastinating or is that a sign of deliberation that somebody didn't just jump up into anything, right? Are they whimsical or optimistic? Irreverent or funny? Inattentive or is that actually curiosity that we're seeing?
Hmm.
Um, to a quick story, I recently, a few years ago, got to be friends with a somebody who back when, in the early aught years was a drummer for a band that, was touring the world. And I met him fast forward, 20 years later, and he was the North American director of product for a brand that, that is makes a lot of the backpacks you're seeing on your campuses. And, sorry, I thought there was a slide there. I'm going to go back. This is somebody who did not go from high school to college. He went from high school to a touring van and then buses and planes. And, he doesn't have a degree that was able to be used as a proxy to point to, show why he would be really good accessing this professional opportunity as the North American director of product for this cool brand. And so, what I think about with that, storytelling and recognition is that, to for we can it's an opportunity for us to look in the mirror because if not us, then who? Right? If it's not our responsibility to take on that recognition and storytelling opportunity, then who's going to do it for people? Like my friend, he got lucky, right? He ended up where he was without having people doing that for him, right? But he maybe had parents, and other support structures that were around to help him make these connections, even though he didn't necessarily have a paper trail, that would have helped make that happen. I I might skip this well, no, I'll say that this is a picture of me probably in 1989 with my pooper scooper kit. Getting ready to go around and ask every neighbor if they want to give me 25 cents. Were those called duck boots, I feel like back in the day, to go and clean up their backyard for a quarter. And again, going back to the stories that would be told about us, right? Like I am really privileged that I had a parenting structure. I had teachers who were able to help me surface that through doing that, I was demonstrating the skills of being comfortable, like cold calling and knocking on a door or ringing a doorbell of people I didn't know and asking them a question that I didn't already know the answer to. I was demonstrating that I could be self-directed, that if they told me your days are Tuesday and Thursday, I was going to show up and scoop dog poop on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? I was demonstrating that I was goal-oriented, that I was able to, you know, figure out how many boxes of baseball cards I would be able to buy on what timeline, depending on how many yards I was able to clean up, right? And so it was not my story that I was being bucketed, based off these negative characteristics that I've, kind of through the support structures I've had throughout, my learning and working career. When I was a busboy, I was able to figure out that learning how to use a broom is actually really helpful when you go to college and nobody else around you knows how to use a broom and having humility is really great. I worked one summer as a process server and that gave me incredible exposure to just the struggle of people around us and the ability to empathize with them. I volunteered at the Sundance Film Festival and was able to surface the narrative and talk about the narrative when I'd be applying for jobs. That hey, I know how to take direction from maniacs and who are yelling at me, but are really just trying to tell me what I need to do, and I know how to hear that, right? And so I was able to have the awareness to extract SLOs from my experiences and essentially, in a world that did not yet have badging, self badge myself for these things, right? I was able to see the invisible connective tissue that empowered me from opportunity to opportunity, and tell that story for myself. And I think there's very few people who enjoy that privilege. And so that's, I think, where the opportunity for us comes in to, seize the power that's in our recognition and storytelling, and to harness it, right? Because, you know, grades are storytellers, but are they really reliable narrators, right? And I know when I was teaching high school Spanish, there were classrooms, to the right and left of me where, somebody's grade literally could be influenced by whether or not they brought in boxes of Kleenex for extra credit, right? And so the grade was not necessarily a reliable narrator of what they knew and were able to do in order to you know communicate to next year's Spanish teacher, to communicate to potential employers the amazing learning achievement of our learners, right? And so the opportunity with SLOs and micro credentials and digital badges is for us to bring to the amazing learning and achieving that's happening in our learning communities in the classroom and beyond it, a degree of radical transparency, right? That we have right now on the transcript. And full disclosure, I work in the office of the registrar. I report directly to the registrar. And so I am a big fan of the transcript. I am not out to slaughter. It is not a sacred cow that I am trying to slaughter by any means. I think the transcript has a really important purpose, and it's really good at its purpose. That said, its purpose is really, for communicating between admissions officers and registrars' offices, right? It's not really very useful for employers. And so, we can go from trying to share something that's not meaningful to employers in the form of a transcript, where we have courses and dates they were taken and grades that were received in those courses, to this recognition and storytelling that surfaces, through things like SLOs, what people are able to do, where in this moment where, most days of the week, you don't have to look very hard to find a story, in mainstream press talking about people questioning the value of post-secondary attainment. It's this opportunity for us to really, surface from within our learning opportunities, the awesomeness that, we can notice, name, and credential, that is the answer to the question of, why should people pursue post-secondary? Well, look at all of this amazing stuff that absolutely is necessary, that absolutely is preparing you for life, personal and career success. And, there's going to be a difference in this skills-based hiring world, where employers are eliminating degree requirements and hiring for skills. There's going to be a marked difference between a learner and an earner who raises their hand and says, trust me, I have those skills, and somebody who says, trust the Cal State system. Trust the University of fill in the blank. Trust the community college of fill in the blank. They're saying I have these skills because they were able to surface, not just the title of classes I took, but the skills, competencies, experiences, and achievements that I had, and equip me with, basically a digital human highlight reel about myself and all the things that I've accomplished and participated in and demonstrated, and they're doing it in ways that are trusted and verifiable. I think that's really important. And I think that what that leads to is an opportunity for us to really showcase the amazingness that we're doing for our learners. And then, really help them operationalize the credentials for what's next, right? That it's not just create credentials, issue credentials, and charge money. That there's this whole life cycle of operationalizing them after that, that is all about connecting us together as humans through the lens of our assets, through what we know and are able to do. And that for me is a world I want to live in. It's a world that I am just convinced is not just aspirational, it is going to happen. I think there's so many signs that it is, pending ubiquity. And I think technology is going to be a big part of it. And I think that for all this, shiny technology, it is really all about humans and connecting us in ways that are meaningful, that are powerful, that are verifiable and trusted. And so I will stop sharing my slides there. And maybe can I get a thumbs up if I successfully stop sharing my slide? Okay, perfect. And I hopefully, and you can feel free to break my heart and tell me that did not do a good job of demystifying this a little bit. But we definitely have a ton of time to get into the weeds and answer all of your questions about just what is this stuff. And hopefully, as the session description described, demystify this space for you and make it feel super accessible. So yeah, let's open it up to questions.
Uh, Noah, so if I could perhaps start, this is, yes, excellent summary of what it is that should, I think, be happening in terms of our skills and competencies. Just like you pointed out, and I wrote the summary in the chat. We do what we know and what we can do, right? In a sense that, I'm not going to socialize with astrophysicists, let's say, because I don't know much about astrophysics, right? And this just goes down the hill that way. So if you could please comment on to how do you see this play out in the classroom? What is the starting point for the faculty, right? How do we observe what it is that students can or cannot do? What would be a good type of assessment to lay out the ground rules, so to speak, for connectivity and making sure that these interactions are meaningful and helpful to students as they move on their way of attaining new skills and competencies.
I think that's a really great question, and I do want to be clear. I think that that's something that is, in a lot of ways, the micro credential part, the recognition part, the badging part is kind of a last mile piece. That's nothing new to, good teaching and learning, right? That if we read Marzano's research, like instructional practices that work, right? And number one, expectations, right? Like, do learners know what their what the finish line is, or what it is that they're supposed to know and be able to do, through this learning, right? And that we achieve that as the learning designers, who may be on this call know, is through backwards design, right? And starting with the end and backwards planning from there. And so, if we're doing that, we already have a framework for that. I think that, something that can be a really helpful, tool to support those strategies for, pedagogy and andragogy is standards, right? That the national or international or state standards frameworks or competency frameworks. So, for example, when I was a high school Spanish teacher, I was a member and still am actually of ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and they have standards frameworks for communication proficiency in presentational communication, in interpersonal communication, and in interpretive communication. They also have standards for intercultural competence. And for all of those, they have proficiency levels. And for each proficiency level, they have very specific can do statements. Right. And so in my high school Spanish classroom, I was able to, align, our daily, our unit level, and our, semester level learning outcomes to national standards. And, in my, beginning kind of playing around with digital badges was back. I don't know if people remember a tool called Edmodo, right? Playing around with badges in Edmodo, where hey, if you've demonstrated that you've hit this can-do statement at this proficiency level, we'll issue you a badge for that. And I think that hopefully that made sense as an analogy that is, I think, kind of universal as a way that the credentialing piece is kind of the the last mile bolt on that hopefully is not adding work to plates, that allows us to take the really great instructional design and pedagogy that's already happening and be able to shine a light on that. And I hope that answers your question, Eric.
Yes, yes, it does. Again, we are here in those Friday SLO talk spaces about practicality, right? Of what it is that we can apply on Friday on Monday morning. So the follow-up question here is, I suppose, there's as faculty, we know that there is certain content to be covered, that we need to do it for the majority of the students in the class. Let's say there's 30, 40, 50 of them in the classroom. um, how do we make it work in practical sense, making sure that we pay attention to what it is that students bring into the classroom, considering they are all individuals, right? That they all have different needs, they have different perspectives, they have different ways of learning. How do you make it work, considering so many different perspectives, knowing that we need to move above and beyond of simply covering content for the majority of the group?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It also makes me realize that I may have steered a little wrong of not saying things overtly on my slides. That I think that yes, like just awesome instruction, or to have uh, um um just sorry, I'm blanking on the word because it's been so long since I've heard it in pedagogical terms. But basically knowing who our students are when they walk into the classroom, meeting them where they are, super important. And I also want to be clear that in terms of the broader conversation of SLOs and micro-credentials, it was definitely not through the fourth grade example trying to steer us away from what we actually have to do, in our day-to-day roles for our jobs. I think that I was hoping to avoid getting into overly complicating the opportunities we have with recognition through what felt like a sort of non-threatening, familiar examples. And so, I kind of want to answer a question you're not asking around just the, practicality of this and specific to SLOs. Um, and we can totally get into talking about it from that more student-centered, kind of culturally relevant, approaches to teaching and learning, right? That were, I forget the amazing person's name who had that TED Talk 15 years ago about, the single story, right? And avoiding that. But I think that going back to that andragogy and you with that, things you can use on Monday, that's the number one, principle of andragogy, right? And when we talk about the practicality of this, I think that there's so much opportunity for this stuff to be practical, in ways that are, not adding work to our plates and that are, making sure that we get through the syllabus and that we're doing so in ways that ultimately serve our learners in really powerful ways. And one example I'll give you of that I think is really cool, that's been in the works for, I bet I heard about this project in 2017, 2018, and it is just now kind of being launched. So speed of higher ed, but a community college system where they went through the entire course catalog that's shared by, every single community college in the system. And they identified the learning outcomes for every single course in the entire catalog. And they now have the ability to empower instructors to, with not wait till the end of a course, but within the course, credential learners for meeting the measurable learning outcomes in that course. And I think one of the ways that gets, where some practical things come into play, I think that there's definitely, a student success aspect, right? That you are getting, kind of small finish lines before the semester finish line, which I think definitely plays into student success and people, getting little wins along the way. And, you're also talking about a learning population where a lot of times finishing the end of the semester isn't something that happens for a lot of people. Life happens. And what, historically, the narrative there told through a transcript is that they took this class and then failed it, right? That they are a unsuccessful, non-completer. What this community college system is now going to have the ability to do is while they're offboarding this learner and, the transcript is still going to show an incomplete or a failed grade in the course, and potentially, debt to their student loans, they're also going to be able on the offboarding to equip them with credentials for the learning outcomes they did meet. Right. And so when they are applying for jobs, they're going to have, asset-based recognitions that are going to hopefully help, be currency in very practical ways that serve as the keys that open up doors of opportunity. And if and when they're ready to re-engage, whether it's at that community college or any other community college in the system, somebody put into the chat that this maybe has implications to PLA policies and to course challenge possibilities. I think that this also speaks to, a near future where they're going to be able to re-engage learners where maybe they don't need to retake whole classes. Maybe they can say, hey, you were only missing one or two learning outcomes. Here's this accelerated thing that you're going to be able to do where you can then do a course challenge and get credit for that course without having to actually start from the beginning and retake it.
No, that's a wonderful, wonderful things you're saying here. But I had, a question. How did you mentioned CPL, credit for prior learning. How do you deal with that? And then how do you take those assistant skills, and competencies, right? From the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I wanted to clarify, Enrique, the question is like, how do we val assess and validate the skills?
Assess and validate, yeah.
Yeah,
Any assistant skills, right? Because students come with prior skills, right? Some do. And so how do you carry those skills?
yeah. Oh, and it looks like Shetnoy might have a question to add on to that. Maybe accidentally unmuted. Um, yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think that in some ways that's not a new question, right, Enrique? That I think that's something a lot of us are going to be familiar with is serving our learners who you are coming to us after having served in the military. Right. And historically, we probably have leaned on things like ACE, the American Council of Education, for, credit recommendation transcripts, where they're saying, hey, based off of, this Army veterans MOS and things, the credentials that they earned during their service career, here's how we're going to crosswalk that to course recommendations. And so, that's one familiar way we've seen that. I think that in certain institutions where there's an existing culture of this, I think that we've have, legacy practices like course challenge, right? Where they've said, hey, here are the learning outcomes. If we have this graphic design course and you're somebody who, is a self-taught career, graphic designer who doesn't need to take this course, you could be teaching this course. You're just here because at your place of employment, it's holding you back from, promotions because you don't have a degree. And so, you're going to look at this course that, you don't need to take it. You have those, we have at a lot of institutions, we have processes where you can challenge that course through a portfolio defense or taking the final. And so I think to Enrique, your point, there are existing levers that I think are really important for just policy and governance that we don't overlook and that we don't try and circumvent. And I think that there's this whole, emerging need, as people are viewing the opportunities with CPL, right? That especially at our campuses, that are, really concerned about student enrollment, right? That it's not about, how do we, selectively enroll, but how do we make sure the people we admit actually matriculate, right? That this is, sort of from a revenue lens, sort of an existential threat. I think that they're looking at CPL as one of the kind of strategies to, maintaining and increasing enrollment that's also mission aligned, right? That we're serving our learning communities. And so I think that that there's some really cool stuff happening out there. One of them that I think is pretty bleeding edge is when we think about these, so-called soft skills. I'm a fan, by the way, if anybody's paying attention to durable skills. That I think there's some real standardization coming around durable skills. There's a great framework from America Succeeds and CompTIA that, might allow us to have kind of shared common language around some of these, quote unquote, soft skills, 21st century skills, durable skills, is the language they're using. And, one of the emerging things is, a lot of times I think we've shied away, from back in the days when, it was an unwritten rule of every staff meeting was to start it by playing a Sir Ken Robinson TED Talk about how schools kill creativity and how the future was about measuring creativity and critical thinking and global awareness, and then schools didn't, after the TED Talk ended, they didn't then go measure that stuff. And my guess is because it's hard and, there aren't publicly traded companies making multiple choice, Scantron tests to help us measure, these things. And so we don't. But what you're starting to see is people saying, no, that is the important stuff. We do need to measure it. And the way that we measure it at scale, absent a Scantron, is through simulations. And I think AI is really helping to accelerate that you're seeing some really cool stuff with, you know, institutions working with vendors to, build out digital simulations where they can, basically have a performance assessment where they can demonstrate these competencies in ways that can be validated. To Enrique's point, right? That we can trust that somebody actually knows how to do this in a way that's scalable, right? Because normally, historically, a performance assessment meant that we had to pay a human, SME, for their time to be able to assess and validate somebody. And now we have the ability to do it, with machines at scale. And so I think that's one of the really exciting ways that we're doing it. And then I think one of the other kind of things that we're seeing is, for people who remember back in the day, the extended transcript efforts. You may have heard more recently of something called the CLR, Comprehensive Learner Record, which is a very specific technical standard for, going beyond, yes, transcript and, this bigger container, going back to that analogy of a human highlight reel that contains our transcripts, our awards, our certificates, our badges, and all these different things, and helps, that there's going to be tools coming online. If anybody has, teenagers in public school, they probably, depending on where you are, have a tool like Naviance or something like that that helps them understand who they are as a learner achiever. We're going to have tools coming online that take the information inside of these big containers. The emerging word is LER, Learning and Employment Record, and, surface from our LER, you know, the holds up a mirror to us to help us see our assets and then help do some of that translation and interpretation, to higher ed, and maybe sends us a signal of, hey, Enrique, here's, based off of what you've done, like, here's this course at Fresno City College that actually you might want to, go for credit for prior learning on, right? And so I think there's going to be just systems that come into play that help make those kind of human connections in that way.
Thank you, Noah. First, I want to address Becca's question in the chat. What are your thoughts on what is worthy of digital badges, I'm sorry, or microcredentials, especially given the importance of SLOs? You're unmuted, Noah.
Sorry, I just wanted to, so what is the importance of, can you tell me or am I just not seeing the question?
It's on Becca's. It's says I'm curious as to your thoughts on what is worthy of
Worthy,
digital
sorry.
badges or microcredentials, especially given the importance of SLO. And then Becca, you feel free to unmute yourself if you will further want to ask that question.
I think that that's a really good question. And I guess my starting place for answering that is that I think it's really important that we have a sense of awareness that of just the incredible power and responsibility that goes into that worthiness conversation, because inherent in deciding what counts, we are also declaring, what does not count. And there's a lot of power there. And I think that it's really important that when we're making those decisions, we're asking ourselves, who is making that decision? Who decided who is making that decision and who is perhaps missing from the discussion in making that decision, because I think that representation matters, and that we can very quickly, have, really important sort of standardization without representation decisions happening in those worthiness conversations. And I think it's also really important that there's some obnoxious person at the table who's pounding the table saying, what if we're wrong about what's worthy, right? What if yeah, that right now there is, I would say that my that I'm an outlier, by the way, on this. I'd say that conventional wisdom, which I think is not wise, is that, that people default to saying, well, if we go to like not just course level badging and recognition, but multiple recognitions within a course, that's going to lead to just credential bloat and badge bloat and flooding the system with way too many things, and so we need to, like, be more selective. And I think that, the risk there is, what if, you know, what we just decided was not worthy of recognition is something that 3 years from now leads to Becca applying for a job. And it's the difference between her saying, trust me, and her saying, trust my, this institution of higher ed, because the institution of higher ed decided it wasn't worthy, so they didn't credential her in it. And now she doesn't have this trusted credential to tell that story. Um, I can tell you, well, this is being recorded. Am I okay? I'll say this out loud, but um, the worthiness question where I'm at the University of Colorado Boulder, and just sort of our framework for how we approach micro credentials is the three-legged stool of meaningfulness, worthiness, Becca, and and consistency. And so, when we talk about whether it's worthy of the CU Boulder brand, and if it's meaningful, and the consistency piece is, here's our policy on micro credentials. Is this a micro credential or not? But on the meaningfulness and on the worthiness question, one of the kind of litmus tests is that's not in writing, but that I encourage people to consider when they're thinking of proposing a new micro credential is, who cares? If the answer to the question of who cares is, well, me, because I'm the one proposing it, or, like, the learner's mom is going to care that they earn this, but the sort of caring ecosystem begins and ends with the person to whom it's precious, and learners' moms, that might be a good sign that it's not worthy. But is this something that would be worthy? Going back to that, analogy from the beginning of fourth grade roster construction. If this would be something that some audience would consume, right? That an admissions counselor would be looking at to make a decision for admissions, that a scholarship committee, would be looking at, that, back when I was under 40, if I ever would have been nominated for a 40 under 40 award, which I wasn't, grr, but like, would that have been, would there have been recognitions that would have been, meaningful and worthy of their attention, and employers, right? Is this something that is worthy of a hiring manager? Is that something they're going to look at and say, this person's interesting, top of the pile, let's bring him in for an interview? I think that's a really good litmus test for that.
No, that's, worthy is a good, it's a good, good word, because I mean, you also have to have buy-in from your uh or the structure from, the academic senate, your institution, right? When it comes to badging, all that good stuff, right? Micro credentials. And so, and then it trickles down to admissions and records as far as the transcripts, and how do you, translate all that um uh strategies as far as, skills and attainment, right?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And Becca followed up, with her own research, which, by the way, I would please share your research. There are communities of practice out there. I can tell you ACRO, which, is for the Registrars and Employment Management Professionals Association, has a free, you do not have to be a member. They have a free listserv for credential innovation. If your institution is an UPCEA member, they have an alternative credentials network that you can join, that's a pretty active listserv compared to some of those that are out there. If you are doing research or looking at doing research, Rutgers and George Washington University co-host the Non-Degree Credential Research Network. But again, going to Becca's follow-up there is, and maybe this was also part of where the original question was coming from, it was kind of, contact hours and seat time. And so, that is, I think that's very real in higher ed. And especially, if we're going to be getting scrutiny from, accreditation bodies over this stuff, which we are. And so I think that's really important. And, I think again, if we're thinking about who cares and we're thinking about, an ecosystem where our, credentials are being operationalized, it doesn't end with the issuance of the credential, that's actually the beginning of the credential life cycle. I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're, what we're credentialing, if what we're credentialing is seat time, maybe we need to have two badges. One is a set, was still there after X number of hours, successfully exhaling shortly after inhaling badge. And then a second badge that's directly related to the SLOs, right? That if, I think, that there's probably really valuable programming at a lot of your institutions that faculty are running that may be 3 hours long. And it may be that as long as there's, clear, meaningful earning criteria that's being assessed, that it is totally worthy of formal, institutional recognition and credentialing. And one quick plug for this will be meaningless for anybody who watches this asynchronously, but for all of you who shared your time and attention with us this morning, there is, speaking of ACRO, and UPSIA and a whole host of other groups. There's a consortium of a dozen higher ed organizations, EDUCAUSE, ACE, NACE, AIR from the research side of things. All these organizations combined for something called the LER Accelerator Initiative, and they have a grant call for proposals. It's due Monday. And before you get overwhelmed, it does not look like an overwhelming grant application to me. It is for a 1-year planning grant. And so the idea being that you want to do something pretty cool at your campus with this stuff, and you want to apply for this grant. I think it's between $10,000 and $15,000 awards, plus you're part of a cohort, so you're not in it alone. Plus, it provides free coaching and consulting. And it's not an implementation grant. It is a 1-year planning grant to plan what you want to implement. And my guess is at the end of that year, there'll be implementation grants that are much larger for folks to implement things. But I would definitely encourage people who, especially if you are thinking around, how might the learning, the SLOs that we're, might be badging, credentialing in our programming, how might we be doing so in a way that's operationalized on behalf of our learners so that they're using it after they earn it? This might be a really good grant for you to consider applying to.
No, one more question. Um, what are the biggest challenges you see in getting faculty buy-in for microcredentials and CLRs, and how have you successfully addressed skepticism about the value?
Oh, yeah. Do as I say, not as I do, by the way. Yeah, no, I don't have that figured out by any means. No, but in all sincerity, I think that depending on where we are, I think that on the faculty side, I think that it's about communication. Like I think that as long as our institutions are approaching this in mission aligned ways, as long as we're doing this, in ways that make sense, I think that, friction with faculty is probably more rooted in, that we didn't slow down enough, that we didn't first find out what questions do you have, and the friction is probably coming from places of misinformation, misunderstandings, and misperceptions about what we're setting out to do, right? Like, like at a CU Boulder, I can tell you, for example, I have had in 2025 a faculty member who said, I don't understand why we should be supportive of this if this is about, kind of undermining the 4-year degree, which is like, They just there's zero, no ifs, ands, or buts. That is not on the menu at our institution for what our goals are. And so, in that case, that's a problem of communication, to get their buy-in. I think that, yeah, I think it's really important that before decisions are made, that they're included, right? So if your campus is going to have a task force and there's not faculty representation, I think that's going to bite you down the road. And I think you're going to be missing out on really important perspective that's going to result in your task force recommendations and your design teams producing something that's not as good as it could have been because you don't have those experts, right? And I also think that that a really important thing is executive sponsorship. That we had from the very beginning some, pretty high up sponsorship at CU Boulder that in the early days allowed us to kind of punch above our weight and go a lot faster and bigger than we otherwise could have. And, even that is not a substitute for, literally, if the provost or president or chancellor is not talking about this, if this is not in the strategic plan, if this is not being resourced, and if this is not being measured, right? Like we in higher ed, if this is important to us, we're measuring it, right? And so if it's not being measured, that's a sort of quiet quitting, right, on this stuff. We may be saying it's important, but if we're not measuring it, that we're communicating a pretty powerful signal about how important it is. And so I think that, part of faculty buy-in is also about, what is going on at C-suite. Is this something that they're talking about? Is this something they're advocating for? Is it in the strategic plan, being resourced and being measured? And then I think that another really valuable piece to that is, not on the academic side, but actually on the HR side. We are trying to tell our learners that this is, that we're equipping them with the what they need to know and be able to do in order to access their successful futures and access and to realize personal and professional and academic mobility and trust us on that. Well, we are usually one of the largest, if not the largest employers in our region. And so is our own HR helping us walk the talk by showing that we as an employer also value these credentials, right? Are we consuming our own credentials in our own hiring practices so that, we can demonstrate, yeah, not, not, no, we're not just telling you that employers value these. We, as one of the biggest employers, are valuing these. And so I think that, it's sort of a Venn diagram on faculty buy-in that a lot of times I think it is unfairly placed at the feet of faculty, right? I think that some of their concerns are really meaningfully addressed if there's other things that are outside their sphere of influence and control are already being addressed. And I think that also gives like tangible, objective kind of things for them to look at and see that you can point to that maybe reduce some of the fear and anxiety of, potentially buying into something, right? Like nobody ever gets consequences for not doing the new thing, right? The status quo is very safe. And so I think that for faculty, it's, a lot of times there's unfair kind of characterizations of faculty reluctance, when the fact is there's not kind of safe space being created for them. Who can blame them, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Noah, if before we move on to the next speaker, if you don't mind, would you please elaborate a little bit about where the conversations are actually with the employers? So do they recognize, because we do hear from politicians, we do hear from the employers that they're expecting more of higher education, right? That there is this issue of, higher education, is not doing what they're supposed to, where's the promise going? How are those conversations happening between colleges and employers? If you could perhaps speak to this aspect of it, right? Because we are getting students ready. We think we are doing the right thing. Where are we with this?
Yeah, there's no monolithic right answer to what that looks like. It's that a lot of different places are doing it in a lot of different great ways, and a whole lot of other places are not doing it or not doing it in great ways. So definitely look at the for models out there because they are there. A lot of them are starting to involve, micro credentials and digital badges, and like it's not about badges, right? Like I don't want to state, the importance of this stuff. But what I do think is important for us to not overstate is that this stuff kind of like the reason that this is, on just a high-speed rail to ubiquity has nothing to do with higher ed. Like we have the luxury of being, at the table while there's still time to lend our voice to shaping the future of this space. But the reason that this space is going to be ubiquitous is not because of us, and it's because of employers, right? That even before the last few years of AI especially, boy, hiring's been broken. You go back a few years, you can read studies from 2020 that said hiring managers have 11 seconds to read a cover letter and resume and make a decision. And you can look in our own hiring practices, right? That almost all the time and all the expensive resources are being spent on, metaphorical pitchforks to move around metaphorical hay, right? The time and resources are not spent on discovering needles. It's about moving hay, right? And the promise of this stuff and this LER ecosystem that we dropped into the chat and this operationalizing of credentials is solving this very big, very expensive problem of hiring's terrible. And retaining people, we're not good at it. But if, take that fourth grade example, right? If we know your skills, your interests, your aspirations, your passions, that we can bet we can, instead of using pitchforks, we can use magnets and have super magnetized needles and just not touch hay, right? And that we can match people and opportunities not just based off of who you know, but based off of the assets that you're bringing that make you a really good candidate to connect with that opportunity, right? And that we're doing it in ways that are just based on your assets, not your last name or who you know or race, gender, ability, age, but based off of, your trusted, verifiable competencies. And while that's really good for humans, the wheel that's maybe just looking at us as cogs, it's also good for them because all of a sudden, maybe there's a very near future where, the applicant tracking systems, the HR information systems, are not just feeding them, these really low probability needles as a way of, that we moved away a bunch of hay using really clumsy proxies. Like, did you have this many years of experience in a job? Because I don't know, like I've worked for people who've had years of experience in jobs who are not good at those jobs. And so, those are really clumsy proxies, right? And so I think it moves us to this place in industry of potentially solving, a really expensive problem for them and in ways that are human centered, right? That we move from 11 seconds in a pre-chat GPT world, where now they have even less time because everybody's scraping the job posting and saying, rewrite my cover and letter and resume and make me the perfect candidate to, a near future where, a hiring manager is only seeing 20 resumes or something, right? Because the AI is consuming, all those applicants and, using things like our credentials and the metadata that we're putting into our credentials to really narrate, what the credentials are credentialing. And as a result, getting way higher probability needles. And so maybe all of a sudden those hiring managers have, instead of 11 seconds, maybe they have 11 minutes to look at somebody and really make powerful decisions. And by the way, I think, I'm in the office of the registrar, so this is not a reflection on admissions. This is me personally saying this, but admissions is kind of a similar, experience as hiring, right? And so I think it also has a chance to improve the admissions experience as well. And just really any kind of matching of opportunity and people short of dating and people who should have access to that opportunity, if you will.